Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to dive into today's topic because we are going to explore the surprising, hidden depths of one of history's most famous deities, the ancient Greek goddess Aphrodite. Now, we all think we know her, right? But the historical reality is vastly more complex and, frankly, a whole lot more fascinating than the myths we're usually taught. Let's get right into it. So, who is the real Aphrodite? Well, I want you to completely toss out your preconceived notions. Forget that gentle, delicate goddess of beauty and romance that you see in Renaissance paintings or in modern pop culture. Prepare yourself for a bit of a historical shock, because the real Aphrodite was an incredibly dynamic, powerful, and honestly, sometimes terrifying figure. To truly understand who she was to the ancient Greeks, we actually need to look at how they named her.
To do that, we first need to quickly define what an epithet is. Basically, an epithet is just a descriptive phrase used to express a specific quality of a person or thing. You see, in ancient Greek religion, deities weren't just one single flat personality. Different cities and cults worshipped vastly different versions of the same god, and they used these epithets to categorize exactly which version they were praying to. It's kind of like a giant puzzle of personalities.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just how dark these names get. I mean, if you were an ancient Greek, you might literally pray to Aphrodite Melena, the black one, or Aphrodite Scotia, the dark one. And even more shockingly, she was known in some places as Andropophonos, which literally translates to a killer of men, and Timborikos, gravedigger. Add Aurea, meaning the warlike, to the list, and these incredibly violent titles completely shatter her modern image as some harmless romantic. So where did this dark side actually come from?
That brings us to Section 1. Ancient Near Eastern Origins, Tracing the Divine Lineage. To figure out where this intense side came from, we actually have to step outside of ancient Greece entirely, because she wasn't born there. Her roots trace all the way back to the 3rd millennium BC with the Sumerian goddess Inanna, who ruled over both love and war. As empires rose and fell, this deity evolved into the East Semitic Ishtar, and then later into the Phoenician Astarte. Notice the constant pairing here, sexuality and combat. During the 8th century BC, Phoenician traders brought Astarte's worship to the Greek islands of Cyprus and Cythera. There, she syncretized with local beliefs to become the Greek Aphrodite, and she brought that ancient Mesopotamian warrior spirit right along with her.
And that warrior spirit, it absolutely survived in the oldest strata of her Greek worship. Just take a look at this quote from the ancient Greek geographer Pausanias. He noted that the famously militaristic Spartans literally worshipped her in full armor as Aphrodite Aurea. For the Spartans, the goddess of love was perfectly at home holding a spear and shield. All right, Section 2. Decoding Aphrodite's name, a linguistic detective story. Okay, let's dive into this, because the mystery of her origins bleeds right into her actual name. The ancient Greeks had this beautiful folk etymology heavily championed by the poet Hesiod, who famously claimed her name came from the Greek word aphros, meaning sea foam. So he translated her name as foam arisen. It's incredibly poetic, right? But modern linguists largely dismiss Hesiod's claim. Since we know her worship originated in the Near East, modern scholarly consensus actually points to Semitic roots. It's likely a Phoenician epithet meaning unique, excellent, or perhaps a Canaanite phrase meaning she of the villages.
Moving on to Section 3, Dueling Origin Stories, the canonical dispute of her birth.
This whole linguistic debate sets us up perfectly for the mythological gossip. If you walked up to an ancient Greek and asked how Aphrodite was born, their answer entirely depended on whose scroll they were reading. Here we have the two heavyweights of Greek myth, Homer and Hesiod. According to Homer's Iliad, Aphrodite has a pretty standard PG-rated family tree. She is simply the daughter of the king of the gods, Zeus, and the titaness Dione. But then we look at Hesiod's Theogony, which gives us an incredibly graphic, visceral birth story. Hesiod writes that the titan Cronus actually severed the genitals of the sky god Uranus and threw them into the sea. The resulting sea foam birthed Aphrodite. It's a stark, almost comedic contrast between a standard divine birth and an ancient, hyper-violent origin tale.
Which brings us to Section 4, Heavenly and Common Love, Peeling Back the Layers of Desire.
So you might be wondering, how on earth did the ancient Greeks deal with these completely contradictory origin stories? Well, ancient philosophers like Plato concluded that there must actually be two entirely different Aphrodites. And this brilliantly illustrates how they viewed human attraction. Plato defined the older Aphrodite, the one born from Uranus, as Aphrodite Urania, or heavenly. She represented transcendent spiritual love. On the flip side, the Aphrodite born from Zeus was Aphrodite Pandemos, meaning common to all people. She represented raw physical lust and everyday bodily desire. Plato basically used her dual myths to neatly categorize the very different ways human beings experience love. And, just when you think you've got her totally figured out, the historical record throws us an absolute curveball. Over in the city of Amethyst on Cyprus, worshippers venerated a male version of the goddess named Aphrodite. This deity was depicted with a full beard, wearing women's clothing, and lifting his dress to reveal a phallus. And this wasn't a joke to them at all. It was a deeply respected apotropaic symbol. Basically, it was a gesture meant to ward off evil and bring good fortune to anyone looking at it. Section 5. Worship and ancient rituals. Temples, festivals, and myths debunked. Stepping away from the complex mythology for a second, how did everyday Greeks actually worship her on the ground? Well, her primary festival was the Aphrodisia, which was this massive midsummer celebration. In places like Athens, priests would purify her temples using the blood of a sacrificed dove, since doves were deeply sacred to her. But perhaps her most famous association in daily life was as the patron goddess of prostitutes. This covered everyone from the street-level pornai all the way up to the highly educated elite companions known as hetairai. In wealthy cities like Corinth, highly successful courtesans were famous for making incredibly lavish, expensive dedications to Aphrodite's temples as a way to thank the goddess for their prosperity. Okay, wait, we actually need to hit the brakes here for a crucial correction of the historical record. For the longest time, historians pushed this idea that her temples featured sacred prostitution, where priestesses supposedly engaged in ritualistic sex acts. Modern scholars have entirely debunked this. The whole idea of sacred prostitution in ancient Greece is now widely dismissed as a historiographic myth with zero factual basis. Yes, the courtesans worshipped her, for sure, but they were not employed as temple priestesses. It's absolutely vital we leave this explainer with the updated, accurate history on that. Now, as the Greek era eventually faded, a new empires stepped into the spotlight. Aphrodite had to adapt to survive. And she did this through a really fascinating process called syncretism. This is just a fancy word for the blending or merging of different religious beliefs and cultures. Let's move to see how this builds across different massive empires. In Hellenistic Egypt, the Greeks essentially merged Aphrodite with the mighty Egyptian goddesses Hathor and Isis. This made her the ultimate patron protector of the powerful Egyptian queens. Then, as the Roman Empire rose to dominance, they identified her with their own local goddess of spring and agriculture, Venus. And in a brilliant, literally game-changing piece of political propaganda, Julius Caesar actually claimed direct family descent from Venus Genetrix. He effectively cemented the goddess as the divine mother of the entire Roman nation. Our final chapter, Section 6, Birth, Marriage, and War, the ultimate divine soap opera. To wrap things up today, we absolutely have to talk about her personal life on Mount Olympus, because honestly, her marriage is the ultimate divine soap opera. Aphrodite was married to the blacksmith god Hephaestus, but she famously carried on an ongoing affair with Ares, the god of war. Well, according to the Odyssey, Helios, the sun, caught them together and tipped off her husband. In revenge, the master blacksmith crafted a microscopic, unbreakable, completely invisible net right over his own bed. When Ares and Aphrodite next met up, boom, the trap sprang, catching them mid-embrace. Hephaestus then invited literally all the other gods into the bedroom to point and laugh at them. Eventually, Poseidon felt a bit bad for them, paid the fine for Ares, and he deeply humiliated Aphrodite fled all the way back to her sanctuary in Cyprus. Oh, and I just love this quirky little mythological side note. You might be asking, why didn't they see the sun coming in the first place? Well, Ares had actually stationed his young soldier, Electreon, by the door to keep watch. But Electreon fell asleep on the job. After being totally humiliated in that net, a furious Ares punished his terrible lookout by turning him into a rooster, doomed for all eternity to scream and announce the arrival of the sun. Which brings us to a really fascinating close. We've seen today that the real Aphrodite was so much more than just a passive symbol of romance. She was a gravedigger, a heavily armed warrior, a brilliant political tool for Roman emperors, and a profound philosophical concept. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If pop culture got the goddess of love this wrong, what other incredible ancient truths are hiding just beneath the surface, waiting for us to uncover them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you think you know.